there is a feeling of this change in America. The America of my youth is lost, and we want to make America great again. So these things are pretty disparate with the Sanders and Trump voters, but who they blame is almost exactly the same. Hi, I'm Michael Moynihan, a correspondent with Vice News and, of course, a columnist for the Daily Beast. And welcome to On the Line. And I just got back from 2.5 weeks on the campaign trail, the caucuses in Iowa and the primaries in New Hampshire. It was grueling and grim. And today we're going to talk about the 2016 presidential election, what's behind us, and what's next. So let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Michael, we got a bunch of people on Skype, and we'll be watching Twitter during the show. So tweet in with the hashtag on the line, and maybe we'll read your question. But let's get started with Malta, who's calling us all the way from Germany.
Malta.
Hi.
Wie geht's, Malta?
Sehr gut.
Gut.
Thank you. Very good.
All right. What do you got for me?
I was wondering if you can explain how Donald Trump, who doesn't have any political or prior political experience, can do so well in the presidential race.
You know, Malta, you have just asked the quintessential European question. And the question that I get from everybody in Europe, and I spent a lot of time in Europe and lived in Europe, and everyone always asks, how on earth is this happening? Now, this is keeping the pundit class alive because everyone's trying to answer this question. But, you know, a guy who has no experience is exactly, part of your question is also part of the answer. So the fact that he has no political experience is why people like him so much. And I have talked to people, I was talking in Iowa, and I was talking to a bunch of people at a Trump rally. And I said, hey, you know, this guy isn't a conservative in any traditional sense of the word. And to a man and woman, they said, we don't care. Conservatism doesn't interest us. The Republican Party doesn't interest us. What we want is a political outsider, is somebody who doesn't really, you know, isn't beholden to the system, you know, like people like Jeb Bush, who raises an enormous amount of money from super PACs, et cetera. Donald Trump, literally everyone I talked to was very excited about the fact that he was self-funded. It's like, this is a guy not beholden to Washington and the old Republican establishment. Now, what that means for his policies, what do people think about his policies? Well, they also like the lack of political correctness. This is also a drumbeat that you hear. It's a very different kind of definition of what I would consider political correctness. Political correctness being things that are, you know, over the top. So we shouldn't say this over the top sensitivity. What Donald Trump means is I should be able to say anything at any time, no matter how offensive it is. So the other day we hear him at a rally in New Hampshire calling Ted Cruz a pussy. And he said, well, I'm not politically correct. It's like, well, no, that's just a bit boorish. It's not about political correctness. But people love this. They love the fact that he shoots from the hip. They love the fact that he isn't scripted and doesn't feel like a robot. And keep in mind, the big criticism of Marco Rubio right now is that he's robotic and that he's repeating the same things over and over like, you know, somebody whose chip has kind of misfired. So the phenomenon of Donald Trump is a complicated one, but I think the outsider thing is what really kind of propels him towards first place in New Hampshire, and we shall unfortunately see what's going to happen in South Carolina.
Okay. It's good explanation.
It's very depressing. It's all very depressing.
Yeah, it is.
But
yeah.
and I will say one follow-up thing is that this is not an American phenomenon. I know people, you know, in European media want to make this into an American phenomenon. It is something that is gripping the globe. It is gripping Western Europe right now too, the populist instinct. This is something that knows no political party. And, you know, in Germany you have AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, which is a far right-ish, but not entirely far right. They're a populist party. And this is the electoral successes all across Europe, too, are these populist candidates who are kind of very Islamophobic and they're, you know, sort of very nativist in their way, which is precisely what Donald Trump is. Yeah. But he has a reality show and they don't. So, you know, slight difference.
Well, luckily.
Yeah.
Not yet. If you mind, I have a second question. So if, let's say, Donald Trump gets elected, what do you think his foreign policy would look like?
Well, I know what I would do is I would be joining you in your apartment in Germany, and I'd be paying half the rent because I have to get the hell out of here if he wins the election. But I suspect You know, it's a really confused foreign policy. So everything about Donald Trump's kind of ideology is a confused thing. It's, you know, whatever way the wind blows, he's there. So what has been interesting about Donald Trump is the two frontrunners in the GOP race, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, have been fire-breathing about neoconservatism. Now remember, in 2003, the invasion of Iraq, it was the left in America was saying the big problem with America is Republican foreign policy, and Republican foreign policy is neoconservative foreign policy. It's very pro-Israel, it's very interventionist. The two leading candidates right now in the Republican election both hate neoconservatism, and they bring this up all the time. Donald Trump's big thing says, you know, if he runs against Hillary Clinton, for instance, if these were the two nominees, he would be hitting her on Iraq. The Republican nominee would be hitting the Democratic nominee on Iraq. But then again, so let's look at the kind of whiplash of this. Bomb the shit out of ISIS. This is something that Donald Trump says when he is on the stump all the time. It gets the people, you know, with their arms up, and they get very excited about this. So what does this mean? He also says, well, let's let Putin take care of this in Syria. So what is Donald Trump's foreign policy? Well, depends on what day of the week it is. I mean, sometimes it's none of our business. Let's get the hell out of the Middle East. He's not sort of reflexively pro-Israel, as every other Republican candidate usually is. And at the same time, he wants to turn Syria or Aleppo or Raqqa into a parking lot. And we'll just bomb them. And what it speaks to is the man has no idea what he's talking about, and he's winging it. And apparently people don't mind if he wants to carpet bomb Syria and call Ted Cruz a pussy. I have no idea what's going on in American politics, and it's a very, very curious moment. So there you go.
Well, let's hope we don't have to share an apartment anytime soon because of political reasons.
All right. Well, you know, maybe just because we're pals now, and I'm moving to Germany.
Yeah, I mean, you're welcome.
All right.
Let's hope it's not for political reasons.
All right. Dankeschön.
Gern geschehen.
Thank you so much. All right, Hopper, what do we got next?
I got all kinds of stuff. Let's start with a tweet, though. Javier Rose has a question for you, not exactly related to the primaries, but it's an important issue nonetheless. So he wants to know, what do you think the chances are that we're going to make Election Day a national holiday?
0. This has come up quite a bit, and you know, there's back as far as I can remember, there's always been this drive to get more people to vote. There was the motor voter stuff in the 1990s, and the sort of MTV spearheaded this thing as when you get a driver's license, you register to vote too. The low voter turnout in this country, I don't think, it's usually when you say a national holiday, that means you want people to take the day off and actually vote. It's to encourage people to vote. But I also have a heterodox view on this and saying, like, I mean, do we want more misinformed people voting? I'm more interested in informing voters than getting them to vote, because what we saw in New Hampshire was a groundswell of misinformed voters casting votes. And what we get is a victory for Donald Trump on the Republican side. No comment on Bernie Sanders yet. So,
okay,
no holiday. We have enough holidays.
I'm going to go ahead and disagree. We should make every day a holiday. Every day we can possibly have is a holiday we should have.
Michael Hopper, is because you are the laziest person on earth. So
fair enough. And with that, let's go to Mohsen Khan, who's calling us from Madison, Wisconsin.
Comrade Khan, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you guys for having me on the show today.
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, so one of my questions for you is, Bernie has been very vocal on how corporations and Wall Street's really going to hate him if he's elected. Yeah. How do his policies affect small businesses?
This there are a number of ways of answering this question. Let me take two. The first one is, remember in 1988 when George Herbert Walker Bush was running, and he said, "Read my lips, no new taxes," and of course he raised taxes. What somebody says prior to election and what they do actually when they're in office are two entirely different things. And what I've found interesting about this election is what Trump is saying and what Sanders is saying is that people and their supporters tend not to understand that the executive is constrained by the Constitution and constrained by Congress. So what Sanders will actually be able to push through is an entirely different story. Now, there are two different ways of looking at how his tax policies will affect small business. I think one of the big ones is we're going to see an increased payroll tax. And that's something that he's been very upfront about. The payroll tax is something that is passed on to basically how employees are paid and how many employees are hired. So it'll affect it in that way. I think that's sort of one of the big ways. But the other thing is we also have to look at what the big taxes will do to companies in Silicon Valley, for instance. So we talk a lot about Wall Street because everyone hates Goldman Sachs and everyone hates these big banks. But at the same time, what are the biggest companies in the US? These lumbering, heavy-breathing companies, Google, Facebook, not so much Twitter anymore, but a lot of big sort of tech companies are going to get hit really hard by a Sanders tax plan. Now, I admire Bernie Sanders for this on one way. I'm not sure of the economic fallout of it, but the one way I really admire him is when he says, I'm going to raise taxes. That is utterly unique in American politics. Everyone usually lies about it and does some sort of backdoor deal. One must respect Bernie Sanders for saying at rallies in Iowa, you know what, I am going to raise taxes. That is a completely alien thing to American politics. How this trickles down, oh God, the Tax Foundation, which I think skews slightly right, has released a report fairly recently that said that this is not going to be good for small businesses. The Sanders campaign hit back pretty hard on this. So you have to wait and see how this is implemented and what Congress actually allows.
Gotcha. Thank you for that answer.
No problem.
So my second question is, I feel like a big question for Bernie is if he can win the black vote. What kind of challenges is he facing to win over this demographic?
Look, Bernie Sanders knows this better than anyone. Because what did Bernie Sanders do the day after he left New Hampshire? After he won New Hampshire resoundingly. What is the thing that we can say about New Hampshire? Kind of a honky state. It's a bit white. So what does he do right after he leaves Honkyville? He goes to New York for his sit down with Al Sharpton. And what he's trying to do is trying to line up sort of members of kind of black political leaders to get them on board. What did he lose the other day? The CBC. The Congressional Black Caucus threw its weight behind Hillary Clinton because it is an establishment, entity, and they like Hillary Clinton. I guess it was probably November. Yeah, it was around November where she had a 50-odd point lead amongst African Americans. Hillary Clinton, 50-odd point lead. And this is because nobody really understood Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has to do a better job of getting the message out. He has a pretty impressive record of being involved in the civil rights movement from the 1960s on. Hillary Clinton and the Clinton administration has a bad record with criminal justice, and that's something that the CBC is also involved in too. So Sanders has to really present himself as a new alternative. And I think that there are a couple of ways of doing that. It's about criminal justice. It's about decriminalization of marijuana or limiting the prison time for drug crimes, which disproportionately affects African Americans. And I'll tell you what, the best person in this race on all these issues, Rand Paul. Rand Paul was fantastic on this issue. And if you look at him in the last Republican presidential debate, he was going on and on and on about racial disparities in sentencing and racial disparities in criminal justice. And I think that that's something that Hillary Clinton has not addressed, and she's been living off of the legacy of Bill Clinton, who was famously called in the New Yorker magazine by, was it Toni Morrison who said it? That he was the first black president. Now, what that meant at the time, what that means now is kind of, nothing in the Obama era and the post-Obama era. But I think she's going to start losing a lot of support to Sanders on this. And we've seen a lot of people peel off and throw their support behind him. So.
Interesting. And so you kind of touched on my next question. So do you think that the next president is going to legalize marijuana?
It depends on who the next president is. But by the way, this question doesn't surprise me because I'm looking right over your shoulder and you appear to have some sort of tie-dyed weed-related thing.
It's not weed-related. Not weed-related.
Oh, it's not? It looks like a leaf. I can't. It's the angle.
It's an angle. Actually, when I bought it, it reminded me a little bit of a supernova, so it was more science.
It's because you were high, though, right?
No. My mom's watching.
Okay. Oh, no. You would never do that. Sorry. Mom, he would never do that. I know nothing. I'm just making this up. To your point, though. Sorry, Mom. Oh, God. To your point, it depends. Bernie Sanders, again, there's a lot of things I disagree with him on this issue. He tabled a bill fairly recently that would decriminalize marijuana as a federal crime. And that's a pretty interesting thing. Will it go anywhere? Again, probably not, because it's a very dangerous thing for somebody running for sort of elective office in a federal way to actually do. Nobody has ever done that. Remember Bill Clinton tried to thread the needle in a way where he said, yeah, I smoked pot, but I didn't inhale, which is one of the most ludicrous moments in modern political history. But that's how much it's changed since 1992 to now. I mean, where you actually have Bernie Sanders on the stump saying, no, this should not be illegal. I was at a Chris Christie rally. I was covering it. I wasn't, with pom-poms. I was there, a week and a half ago at a firehouse in New Hampshire. And Christie had half of an interesting thought. In the first half, and of course he dropped out today, but his half interesting thought was to have drug courts, because we're really cramming our prisons with people who are nonviolent offenders. The other half that was terrible was he is a traditional politician. And he said, I think marijuana is horrible. I think it leads to addiction, all this utter nonsense where there's no science to back any of this stuff up. But that is pretty much the standard idea. If Ted Cruz becomes the president, you can expect worse policies. If Donald Trump becomes the president, who knows? Because who knows what he thinks from one day to the next. If Bernie Sanders did, I think you'd have a very, very positive push towards legalization for sure.
Cool, thank you. Those were all my questions. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Mohsen, thanks for coming on, dude. So, Michael, as long as we're talking about legalization, let's push on this a tiny bit farther. Brian literally just tweeted us saying, on the issue of legalization, if a Republican were elected, federal action could be taken on states where marijuana is legal. Is he right about that, or what could happen in the states?
Well, the FDR, who referred to the states as laboratories of democracy, what a Republican would never want to do. And by the way, I would say a Democrat can take federal action too, and the Obama administration has, because the DEA has raided marijuana dispensaries, has raided them in California, and that's under Obama's watch. So that stuff is already happening, and already has happened. But one would hope that if a conservative were to actually stick to conservative principles, none of them do, and of course we're seeing Donald Trump, who has no principles, that the states are allowed to do what they want to do. I mean, that's the entire point of conservatism and federalism, the idea that the states are laboratories of democracy and they can make these decisions for themselves. So I would be very surprised if any mass federal action happened, but we already do see federal action against marijuana dispensaries and states that have legalized or decriminalized marijuana.
Well, there you go, Brian. There's your answer. So
thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and say hey to Zac Alfred, who is calling us from Oxford in the UK.
Oh, Zac, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. You're in Oxford?
I am, yeah.
But you strike me as an American.
I am.
Okay, so you're an exceptionally clever American who's studying at Oxford?
No, but my fiance is, but I'm here.
Okay, good. Okay, well, let's get her on next time.
Most of the students I meet here, I think they're way smarter than me.
Okay.
A lot of smart people here.
So what's your incredibly smart and penetrating question?
So there was something I was going to ask you before, and then when we started talking about Donald Trump, there was something else that kind of came up. And
sure.
What I really am interested in knowing, because, I mean, you said that Trump kind of says whatever he feels like saying. He has no consistency in his sort of policy ideas, if they're even policy ideas to begin with. Is there sort of been any kind of peek or look at what his policies might actually look like? I mean, is he just going to appoint a bunch of people who like him and who he likes to kind of run his administration for him? Is what he's saying now really important, or would it be important when he would be president? Hopefully not, but if so.
Well, one would hope that it would be important, but I think that you're right in the sense that, or your implication is right, that it isn't important right now, because Trump has done a number of things. He has told us that things are going to be huge, and they're going to be amazing, and they're going to be fantastic. And when pressed on these details, he says, you know what I'm very good at? I'm very good at hiring smart people. I mean, he said this a million times. I mean, this is not an exaggeration or a joke. The radio host Hugh Hewitt, who is also one of the moderators of the CNN debate, pressed him on his foreign policy. This is when Trump famously didn't know the difference between the Iranian Quds forces and the Kurds, and had a sort of big trip up there. But he said, that was the headline. As the interview went on, he said, Hugh, this doesn't matter. And why it doesn't matter is I'm going to hire good people. Now, what he hasn't told us are who these people he's going to hire. I mean, the difference between foreign policy advisors can be night and day. It can be intervention or non-intervention. So we really have no sense of what his policies are. He avoids specifics on policies. Jobs, good example of this. He says he's a great businessman, and he can do things that nobody else can do because he's run a business. Now, what are his specifics? Nothing, really. He finally came out with something specific, and then he denied it, by the way. He said, we're going to put a 45% tariff on Chinese goods coming into the country because it's killing American business. And any economist that has a functioning brain will tell you that that would crater the American economy. It would just destroy the American economy in a matter of 2, 3, 4 weeks. So his concrete policy proposals are not only crazy, they're incredibly stupid. And I shouldn't editorialize these things, but this is what I think frightens people on both the left and the right, is the fact that he shoots from the hip, and when he does kind of grab onto something, an actual policy proposal, banning Muslims from coming in, blah, 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 they're usually completely bananas. So that's my depressing verdict. So
do you think, though, I mean, so one of the other things I wanted to ask you about, because you've been on the campaign trail and you've talked to people in Iowa, New Hampshire. There's a lot of difference, obviously, between Trump and Bernie, but are there similarities in kind of who their supporters are, and where this like popular waves of support are coming from, despite the fact that they're, just on complete opposite ends of the spectrum in almost every way?
I would modify that in a small way and say that they come from opposite ends of the spectrum in some ways. I mean, they do in the sense that, Bernie Sanders is a former mayor of Burlington and has a very sort of left-wing base, and they look very different and they feel very different when you're talking to them. But there is a point when the kind of left fringe for mainstream American politics and what I would imagine is the sort of right populist fringe, where the twain does actually meet. And I did meet these people, and I thought this was kind of a unicorn thing, that were trying to decide between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. I met a number of people who told me this, especially in New Hampshire. And the thing is that populism has a huge number of overlaps. The attacks on Wall Street. You know who's attacking Wall Street just as hard as Bernie Sanders? Donald Trump. He hates Wall Street. He hates Wall Street speculators. He doesn't think they're taxed enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Free trade. Donald Trump is not a fan of free trade. Bernie Sanders is not a fan of free trade. There's a lot of labor overlap here. So kind of labor union people that I met were wavering between Trump and Sanders. Now there's substantial differences on taxes, et cetera. But there is a ton of populist overlap, because what they are both appealing to are people who feel like they're getting screwed over by the establishment, by the 1%. And the irony is, of course, that Donald Trump is the 0.01%, but he has harnessed that in a way that I'm an outsider, I use my own money, and I'm not beholden to anybody. And guess who also uses the exact same message? Bernie Sanders. So there's a lot of overlap, yeah, for sure.
But the people who are trying to decide between them, are they is there anything substantial that they're trying to look at? Because, I saw also recently an interview where there was this woman who said she loved Trump, and who's your second choice? Mm-hmm. Sanders. Yeah. To me, this is how can you think this? Yeah. What are you looking at? What is appealing to them?
I think the appeal is who is responsible for my problems. And so one of the most curious things that not many people are talking about is coming out of New Hampshire. Who wins big in New Hampshire? Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, the people who say the system's not working, the system's stacked against us. What's going on in New Hampshire? Lily white state, fairly low unemployment. It's 3.5%. It's a fairly wealthy state. It's not a particularly religious state. So what are they responding to? There is a feeling of this change in America. In one sense, it's a labor thing with Bernie Sanders, this idea that big business is running our lives. And there's also the PC thing that Donald Trump is going on about, it's like there are older people that I talk to that feel like, and I'm this is totally honest, this is how people feel. This Caitlyn Jenner America, honestly, think there's something different going on. That the America of my youth is lost, and we want to make America great again. So these things are pretty disparate with the Sanders and Trump voters, but who they blame is almost exactly the same. It's the establishment figures, it's the big banks, it's the people that want to stack the system against you, the little guy. And there's a lot of that overlap. It's not a satisfying answer, but it's the one that people give me, and I don't buy it, but that's sort of the dominant answer that you get from people, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, it's really, viewing this from afar, even as an American, it's very, like perplexing because I can't, talk to people in the U.S. all the time and learn about these things. So it's very strange.
I mean, you can ask the Brits the sort of popularity of UKIP and why the BNP had somebody in European Parliament. I mean, every country goes through its populist madness phase, and Europe is going through a big bit of it now too. So unfortunately, we have our own, and our own is pretty gross. I'm trying to be like a reporter. I mean, I don't have an opinion, but I do. But thank you. I very much appreciate your questions.
Yeah, and Zach, thanks for calling us all the way from the UK. I know it's very hard to Skype from there, but
it's not Botswana. I mean,
I know it's not that hard, but still, thanks, Zach. Michael, we got a tweet from Juan. Juan wants to know, why do roughly 40% of registered voters just skip primaries?
Yeah, I think the number's probably higher. When those voters make a difference for a candidate, of course. I mean, more voters would, of course, make a difference. And these are the times when you should vote, primaries, when there's lower stakes. I mean, remember in the Iowa primary, in the Iowa caucuses in 2012, the Republicans had 3 winners because it was a difference of, I think the first difference was 12 votes between Rick Santorum and, I mean, and Mitt Romney and ultimately Ron Paul. So these are actually votes that matter. And why more people don't do this? Look, there's a bigger apathy argument about politics in America. People care less about it than they ever have. And it's very difficult to get people involved. But the last 2 election cycles have been interesting and very, very different because youth engagement in the Obama campaign and now in the Sanders campaign has been really, really high. The turnout yesterday in New Hampshire, was it yesterday? What's today? Thursday? 2 days ago in New Hampshire. I don't even know what day it is or where I am. It was an all-time high. 270-odd thousand voters. Obama caucus in Iowa, all-time high. So we're seeing the trends go up, actually. But, America's a very peculiar place where people don't like voting. Yeah. They just don't care. I mean, it's a complicated answer, I think.
Love democracy, don't like voting.
Exactly.
And with that, let's go to Rin. I believe Rin does like voting. Isn't that right, Rin?
Rin, do you like voting?
I do like voting, yeah.
You do?
I do.
Where are you, Rin?
I do.
What state are you in?
I'm in D.C.
Oh, you're in D.C. Oh, so you're not in a state.
Yeah. No,
at all.
I'm not.
Yes. Okay. You're in a principality of America.
Yes.
Rin, vote lover. What's your question?
My question is actually about New Hampshire and kind of piggybacking off this establishment thing that we've got going on. Bernie won New Hampshire, but it seems like Hillary got all of the delegates. So do you think that there should be a change to the electoral primary process and that would help people that aren't backed by the establishment get the votes?
Rin, are you a Democrat?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Well, this is entirely in your hands and in the hands of your comrades in the Democratic Party because the superdelegate is particular to the Democratic Party. Republicans don't have this. So let me explain this briefly of what's going on. The last I looked was 15-15 delegate split in New Hampshire. That means equal number of delegates for 2 candidates. What it also means is that Bernie Sanders crushed Hillary Clinton if you look at these vote totals, right? So why did this exist? This is around the 1980s, early 80s, 80, 84, where the superdelegate system gets put into place. And you know what it was for? It was actually to prevent extreme candidates, the people choosing an extreme candidate that could not win in the general election. So the party elders, who are the superdelegates, would come in, Bill Clinton is a superdelegate, would come in and cast their vote for somebody who is less extreme and push that person towards the nomination. It is a profoundly anti-democratic process, much in the same way we discuss the Electoral College. We do that every election year. And now we are discussing superdelegates. And the problem is to see this total perversion of democracy and to see Bernie Sanders walk away from New Hampshire with the same amount of delegates as a woman who had a terrible ground game, could not get anyone under 30 to vote for her, and was utterly trounced, is, I think, a great miscarriage of justice in the state and the people, and for the Sanders campaign. But this has to change. And you know what? It never changes because it never comes up. It's usually resounding for one candidate. And now we have people aligning against Bernie. And look, I'll tell you what this is good for. This is really good for Bernie Sanders in one way. This underlines the point that the establishment is against him and that the people's will be subverted by the Washington political class. And if he uses that, he gets a great point, But then again, he's still lost 15 delegates. So.
Yeah. Well, but given that, so he has been getting all these smaller donations.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, Trump's been self-funded. So we see this complete change in electoral fundraising. Do you think that that's going to lead, even if they're not nominated, do you think that'll change the fundraising process later on?
What I think about this is I hope it changes people's views of money in politics. Now, whatever your views of money in politics, I respect, Republicans and Democrats there are people on both sides that are opposed to big money in politics. McCain-Feingold is John McCain, and Russ Feingold, Republican and Democrat, okay? So we have a split there. People on both sides hate this sort of thing. But what I think kind of screws people's minds up is that lots of money buys elections. It's not true. And I said to somebody in Iowa after this, the comparison that I used is that if I took a lot of steroids and went and tried to play Major League Baseball, I'd hit 0 home runs because I'm a terrible baseball player. You still have to be a good candidate. If you have that money, Jeb Bush spent $3,000 per vote in New Hampshire, and he got 2.5% of the vote. He spent $2,700 per vote in New Hampshire, and he got, I guess, I was in 6th or something. You know what Ted Cruz spent? $12 a vote. And what Bernie Sanders self-funded. So this idea that the super PAC and all this money can buy your way to the White House is not true. It can help, for sure, and especially help if you're a good candidate. But Hillary Clinton has a massive fundraising apparatus, and she's getting killed. And it's actually to her detriment because Sanders is hitting her on the Wall Street stuff and where this money comes from. So, you know what? I mean, there are a couple of different wrinkles in the post-Citizens United world of what money means in politics. And I think money is not what everyone thinks it is. I mean, it can help again, but I don't think, the Koch brothers, who are the great bogeyman of politics, David Koch or Charles Koch said not long ago, we're wasting our money. We lose tons of elections. Now, it's not entirely correct because they do influence things in ways that they have won, but it's not assured that you're gonna win.
Well, but with things like Hillary getting Goldman Sachs, I think there was some statement released where she said she would repeal Dodd-Frank or look into repealing it or lightening it. And obviously that's an influence. She wouldn't say that at a populist rally. Like, there's no way.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a very good point. And there's a kind of a disconnect sometimes in the way people think about this. Money attracts, you attract money that is kind of on your side. So if people think that you're going to support them, it's very rare that people are kind of bought off because it's so obvious. If somebody's, says, I support X policy, business comes, drops money, and then they support. It doesn't really work like that. So they know people who are malleable, who are persuadable, or who are on their side. But the Hillary Clinton stuff, the Dodd-Frank stuff, look at how she got hit by Anderson Cooper. That answer was a disaster.
It was so bad.
And by the way, it's totally false too. When she said, well, that's what they offered me. Yeah. No, she actually gave them a price and they paid it. But that was a stumble where the Wall Street money is actually right now hurting her more than it's helping her. So if I were her, I would back away from it. And I think people are going to learn this lesson from this campaign. That taking money from bad people or people that aren't popular is not a good policy.
Right. Do you think she'll release those papers or the speeches?
Well, we've had a few news reports from people that attended them, and I don't know why she wouldn't, because according to the attendees, it was pretty banal stuff. No promises, but she probably should, because if she doesn't, she looks like she's hiding something. And this is a Clinton disease with emails and with stuff. They look like they're hiding things. But thank you for those questions. And I hope I didn't depress you too much. Maybe.
Well, Rin, thanks for coming on. Hey, Michael, before we wrap up the show, one last tweet for you.
Oh, good.
Mike Black wants to know, do you think it's appropriate to call the Democratic primary, and, well, generally the entire election, Revenge of Occupy Wall Street?
Mike Black, I think it's a good point. And you know why I think it's a good point is because the media class, of which I'm a member, and I don't say that in a pejorative way, media class, but after Occupy dispersed from Zuccotti Park and kind of sort of disappeared into the rearview mirror, people said, what a waste, what a complete bust that was. People made a lot of noise, nothing much happened in the long run. I think that there was a kind of incubation period, and I think that we're seeing that in this election, that the two top candidates, Republican and Democrat, are taking aim at Wall Street speculators, fat cats, et cetera. So yeah, I think this is the revenge of Occupy Wall Street. I think Mike Black is absolutely right. And I see the established political class, especially Democrats, freaking out and trying to figure out how we block Bernie. And that is, I think, probably wouldn't have happened to the same degree if Occupy hadn't happened. If you had asked somebody in 2008 what kind of candidate we would have, and you said a Bernie Sanders candidate that was doing this well, people would have thought you were completely out of your mind. And as a matter of fact, Barack Obama moderated quite a bit and didn't go left because of fear that he would be tagged, as he was tagged, as some sort of radical. So, yes, Mike Black, you're right.
All right. Well, with that, Mike Black, you're right, and Michael Moynihan, that's the end of our show.
And Michael Moynihan's always right.
Yeah, I didn't say that, but
no, I did.
All right, fine. We can quote that to you, Mike. Why don't you go ahead and say goodbye to everybody watching at home?
Goodbye, people watching at home, and I want to thank the 4 very smart questioners. There seems to be always very smart questioners on this show for joining us, and join us next time. I won't be here, but somebody else smarter than me will. So thanks for watching.
I want you to move your quadrant a little
northwest. Yeah.
Okay?
But that's pretty good, though, right?
That's terrific. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
You're gonna go stop.
I'm a killer.
You're a killer. You're a natural born killer.
I'm a natural born killer.
Squirrels will fear you.